everybody, welcome back to the Claremont Classic Garage. Today we've got Gord's Ferguson in the shop. Let's see what we're going to do to it. Previously we've done a bunch of work on the back end of this thing. We redid all the hydraulics, we resealed everything, but I'm still seeing this every time I park it. And that is the front seal in the transmission. So today we're going to go ahead and change that. It's not really that big of a job. It shouldn't take us too long at all. So first thing we got to do is get the hood off, and then we could start the split. It's going to split here, and the seal we're going to change is in about there. Now that we've got the hood off, I'm going to get the I got to get the fuel tank off. You'll notice the fuel tank spans. It basically connects the kind of the back half and the front half together. So it spans the joint where we're going to split the tractor. So it's got to come out. The other things that go across the joint are wires, the air intake tube, the exhaust, and the throttle linkage. So we'll work on all of that stuff in turn. And of course, we've got the radius rods and the drag links. You can, depending on how you want to do it, you could take this all apart, take the radiator off, take the wheels off, take the axle off. You could take it all apart piece by piece. Or, I mean, you could just kind of grab it all with the crane and sort of roll the whole thing back in en masse. That's what we're going to try and do here. So it's basically just roll it back, change the seal, roll it back in. We'll find out if that's going to work out for us or not. But first we got to get this fuel tank out of here.
With fresh tires, even if they're out of position.
Next thing we're going to get out of the way here is the exhaust pipe and the air intake pipe. And now, rather than wrestling with this pipe around the bell housing out here, for the sake of taking off one more nut there on the hanger, we'll just take that nut off and take the entire exhaust system off. Now on this side, we need to get the choke rod unhooked, the main throttle rod unhooked, the alternator wire, and the oil pressure line. So with this, there is a big procedure to adjust this throttle linkage if you're putting it back together from scratch. If you're happy with the way your tractor has been working, all you got to do with this is just mark it. Mark it where it is and put it back exactly there when you're done, and you'll be good. And before you slide this thing out of here, we have to remember to unhook the linkage under the dash. Now we could just kind of fiddle and goof around and get this thing slid back. What we're up against now is the nut for the oil pressure line is stuck in this fitting. That is steel, this is brass. So they're dissimilar metals. They shouldn't really stick that badly. So we don't want to twist the line off. We don't want to snap the fitting off in the block. So what we're going to do here is just we've got to punch against it. We're going to try and get it so that we can get the nut. Usually I would like to get something heavy like a dolly in behind it and whack the side of it. But I can't do that in this situation. So we're just going to try and do it like this and try and kind of, because the brass is soft, what we're doing right now, we're not really clobbering it, we're just tapping it. We're actually kind of moving the brass around a little bit and slightly deforming it. Now, once we get the nut cracked free from the fitting, that's no guarantee that the nut will be free on the line. But that's a whole nother, there we go, look at that. And the nut is free on the line. Once we get to this point, if we find that the nut is stuck on the line, a little heat from a propane torch will usually free that up. There's only a few things on this side we have to unhook. This battery cable, the hot lead going to the coil, and the headlight wire just unplugs. The starter can stay, and then we can get ready to take the steering stuff off. Now we're going to pop the drag links and the radius rods off. Here's a little trick to get these drag links out. I've showed you this before. You run the nut almost all the way off, but not quite. Pry up on it a little bit, and one, bang, off they come. First time, every time. Once we've got the radius rod off, what we can do is turn the wheel straight, or, straightish, and drop a big 1/2-inch bolt through there. So that'll keep this wheel mostly straight. So all we have to do is support the back of the engine, and this whole thing can roll back and forth. This will work on Ferguson's and 9 ends and 2 ends. It won't work on 8 ends because on 8 ends they move this hole back to here, and you would end up with the wheel steered like that. Won't work. Next step is to get the thing sitting on an axle stand with the front wheels just barely off the ground like we've got it here. That'll allow us to use the crane and jiggle and manipulate stuff and get this thing out of here. Before we put the strap around for the crane to support the back of the engine, we need to remove these 2 struts and the inspection cover. These are unique to the Ferguson tractors with Continental engines because they just have a pressed tin oil pan. Ferguson tractors with diesel ones with Perkins engines, or the ones with the British Standard engine, they have a cast oil pan, which is a stressed member, and you won't have these strut rods. But on the Continentals, we got to get these out of the way. There, we've got her slung. Now I could start taking the bolts out. It's still a little bit loose. As we get it closer to coming off, we'll tighten that up some. And then I've got this one. This little strap here is just around the water pump, and it's not really to lift anything. It's just to stabilize the engine, because you have to remember it's got this big pivot pin in the front axle, and the engine, if we just lift it by the bottom, it's going to want to tilt to one side or the other, which is fine as far as just lifting it up, but it'll make it difficult to put it back in straight when we're done. So we'll use this just to kind of stabilize it a little bit, but we can't tighten that up until we've got this baby snugged up. All right, we've got all the bolts out. We've got it pretty much level. So now we can just sort of kind of walk it out gently. And it should come. No, I see I have to lift up the front of it a bit more now. Hang on. That. Now we can see that we lifted up a little bit on the front strap. Now you can see this gap along here is pretty even. That's what we want. And it'll come out more easy now. Just got to get it off the dowels, eh? Once it's off the dowels, it'll come right out. Just like that. She is free. Oh, we got this stud yet to come out of it. There. And now we just pull the crane back, and everything will come back. Everything will come back with it. It's pretty common when you open these things up to find these, what I call the ghosts of starters past. These are the parts from old blown up starter drives over the years, and they always collect in here in the bell housing. So what we got to do now is this here is the input retainer, and you can see back there there's 4 bolts that hold it to the main case. The fluid level is down about there, so we don't have to worry about fluid coming out when we take this thing out. And I may get some Reseal or kerosene or something, and once I've got this stuff out here, clean this the inside of this housing up a little bit. But I've seen them a lot worse. So you can see here, this is the input shaft of the transmission. That's your throwout bearing, and if we operate the clutch, we can see how it works. This thing pushes. This thing pushes on the throwout. This fork here pushes on the throwout bearing, which pushes on the 3 fingers of the clutch here, and they pivot on shafts in there, and that's what pulls the pressure plate back and lets the clutch disc be free. Once we're done in here, I'm going to pull the pressure plate off, and we'll look at the clutch and make sure it's not all full of oil, because if it is, we have to clean it up like we did the brake shoes. So, first thing we got to do here is pull the return springs off of this. There. Now we can get this up. See, this is something we don't want to see. You would think that all this oil all over this is good, but that's not. That attracts clutch dust and stuff, and it will actually stick this. So we've got to get all these parts nice and clean. You want this in here to be as dry as you can have it. We can feel here the throwout bearing is perfect. There's nothing at all wrong with it. It's smooth. Now, what we got to do is get in there with a long extension and take those 4 bolts out, and then this entire assembly comes out. This in here, in behind these 2 shafts, is the area where your Sherman or your aftermarket auxiliary transmissions would be. So once we've got all the bolts out, then we just jiggle this thing out of here. It'll come, and hope we can get it out between here, but obviously that ain't gonna happen. So in this case, what we have to do is we need to remove the clutch shaft. Yippee. You can take either the clutch shaft or the brake shaft out. It's not, it's basically either or, right? So it's probably easier for us to take the clutch shaft out, I would say. So we'll go ahead and do that. You can see here, it's just the fork is held onto the shaft with 2 screws and nuts, and then you just slide it out. We got the 2 bolts out, or screws, whatever they were. Now we just pull the clutch, and the beauty is it comes out this side, so we have not lost our clutch adjustment because we didn't have to take the pedal off the shaft. Yeah, pretty good. Now our input retainer can come right out. Okay, so we'll get our springs off. We got a lot of cleaning to do here, but you can see there's the input of the transmission, and whoops, there you can see here. There's the seal we need to change in there, and yeah, it's shot. All of our parts are outside drying, so while they dry, for the few seconds that it takes, I'm going to pop the pressure plate off, and we're going to make sure our clutch isn't all covered in oil. Like I look down in here, look, that's no good. We don't want that getting involved with our clutch. So here's the clutch disc, and you can see this kind of shiny wetness on it. That is just a light film of oil. So we've got to get this all cleaned up. The flywheel is fine. It's not all banged up or nothing, so we can just get all this stuff cleaned up. How's our pilot bearing? Is perfect. Good. It's a roller bearing on these things, a sealed roller bearing. That's good. I mean, somebody has been in here before. There's a lot of nice, shiny looking, newer stuff in there. But anyway, we're good. We're going to get this stuff all cleaned up and let it dry, and we can put the clutch back together. Okay, now we can get going on this thing here. First thing we got to do is in the very back of this housing here, right down there, there's a drain hole to let out anything that may escape through this seal or through this gasket. And what they do in that drain hole, they stick a cotter pin to the outside world and bend it over. The idea being that the cotter pin rattles around in that hole and keeps it clear to let out any oil that accumulates in this little low spot here. On this particular one, somebody had put a cotter pin in it that was too big and was pretty much just blocking the whole hole. So we've got a smaller one. We're going to put it in. There it is. And then we'll bend it over on the outside, and that'll be that done. See, just like that. And anytime you're servicing the thing, just make sure that's free. Here's our input retainer. I've got it in the vise. We'll have to clean the old gasket off it, but here you can clearly see it's got the original leather seal in it from 1949. Well, no wonder it was leaking. Holy moly. So we're going to knock that out, put a new one in. We're going to scrape this gasket off, get this thing all cleaned up, and we can pop her back in. Yeah, no wonder that leaked. The leather is as hard as a rock and mostly gone. The spring was just kind of free-floating. Unreal. Oh, well, we'll pop a new one in, and she should be good now. So we got our new seal here. We're going to go ahead and get it packed with grease. In behind the lip there, so that the little spring, This just helps keep the little spring in there when you're banging it to install it. Yes, we could go over to the press. I really need to get a seal installer kit is what I need to get. So I'm not banging on these things with old sockets and stuff. If you use a seal installer with the proper mandrel, the spring doesn't come out. But anyway, this is how we do it. This is how we roll. So we're going to put that in there. Then we have a suitably sized socket from our seal installer kit, and we'll just slowly tap this baby in until she's home. You just go nice and easy. It'll go in. There we go. We're just about there. And seal up, right? Because this faces into the transmission. You always put the lip of your seal toward what you're trying to seal. There we go. Good. So there's our seal in there. Make sure the lip is well greased. Now we can go get the input shaft of our transmission and put it down in there. So before we drop that in, we're going to just put a little grease on the race there. And this has another race in the back side of it, so we'll put a little grease in there and a little bit of grease where the seal runs. Now, this is probably not going to go right through because it's going to hit the workbench. But anyway, just nice and easy, straight down in. Yeah, okay. That's okay, it's in. Now, a little grease on here for our new gasket. Transmission. I've gone and stuck a guide bolt in there. Now we'll fish our input retainer in there, get it over the guide bolt, and get it snugged into place. What do you know? They're smart. They know someone like me might be working on this and put this in upside down. So it's got a wee pole top and bottom. But this here, you'll see how it's got a little more meat there than there. That's the bottom. Now we're going to put in our 4 bolts and torque them to 30 foot-pounds. And because they go right through into the oil side of the transmission, we're going to put a little sealer on the threads. You can see where they had sealer on them originally. There we are. Once we're done, we make sure that the input shaft turns nice and free. It's not tight or binding. That's good. And while we're in here, also a good idea down below is that cap. That's the front bearing retainer for the counter shaft. We've made sure that those bolts were tight too. It's all good. Now we can go ahead and put the cross shaft and the throw-out fork back in. There we go. Instead of the stove bolt and castle nut and cotter pin that was there originally, I replaced it with a grade 8 1/4 bolt with a locking nut. That I think is better. Now we can, I've got the return springs on already back there. We could slide the release bearing on. There we go. And hook up the springs. Now I can operate the pedal a couple times. Make sure it's good. No binding, no hanging up, nothing. Perfect. Now we can put the clutch back on. We've got our alignment tool. And you'll see there the clutch has the hub has a thin side and a thick side. You see the hub, it's taller on this side. That's the side that goes toward the transmission. So that guy just goes in there like that. And then we can put the pressure plate over it and just draw the bolts on evenly all the way around. And we'll torque them to 25 foot-pounds when we're done. There we go. Now we can mate it back together. And I'll tell you something else I've learned about this. This crane, I don't use this one often. It leaks. When I started this, the top of the engine was up here, and now it's down there. Oh well, and that might be a little future project. We might have to get into that the ram on this crane. Anyway, I got to get it jacked back up, and we can put her back home. All right, we got it. We've got our stud through in the top here, and I've got a little bit longer bolt than what it actually belongs in there to kind of just use as a guide, and she's gone right in. You can see once you get it in this far, you know that the clutch is engaged on the input shaft. Everything is good. It's just a matter of jiggling it the rest of the way in. You want to avoid, if at all possible, drawing it in with the bolts, because if something binds, snap, you're out of housing. Or like an engine block. That's bad. So we're going to try to just keep jiggling it a little further and see if we can get it the rest of the way in. And there it is. Now we can work our way around and get all the bell housing bolts back in. Once I've got them in, then we'll put the inspection cover and the strut rods in at the bottom. Now that this is all done and back together, I'm just going to go ahead and hook up these wires on this side. Then we can get the radius rod and the drag link back on, and I'll see you on the other side. Left side done, on to the right. Now, before we start putting the right side of it back together, the last couple of times I had this thing running, it was starting to run like a bag of poo again. So I want to just pop the top off the carburetor and make sure there's not a bunch of junk in the bottom of it. These aluminum ones, these aftermarket aluminum ones, will grow the white fuzz in them if they get any moisture in there. So I just want to have a look. I got to take the top off it. We'll blow it all out and put it back on and see what happens. I don't know if you can see it, but there's all kinds of junk and crap down in there. So we're going to dump this gas out of here and then just give it a good blowout with compressed air and put it back together. There we are. Now all we have to do is put the fuel tank and the line back on. And I think I'll start it up and run it around a little bit before I bother putting the hood back on. And I don't know. Just in case. Well, let's see what happens. You see fuel flowing in there? There's a lot of junk floating around in that sediment bowl. That might be something to do too. I might want to service that. Anyway, we'll put the battery on. And we'll see if this thing will start. And we'll take it outside and give it a bit of a run. Still runs like a bag of hammers. Well, that's pretty darn good. I fiddled around with the timing and the carburetor, and I've got it running, I think, as good as we're ever going to get it to run with that Land of Almost Fits carburetor. The power screw on it is really, really, really touchy. But I've got it kind of in a happy medium. It's not like Gord is out dragging a 3-bottom plow with it or nothing. He's got a big basket that he carts around the bush with it, and it's going to run fine for that. In the meantime, I'm going to keep my eye out for a proper Marvel carburetor for it. In fact, I may even keep his original one here as a sample, and so I've got something to goof around with. The problem is I would throw one of the carburetors from one of my Fords on it, but the problem is the Ferguson, the manifold, the holes are just a tiny bit further apart than a Ford, so you can't physically put a Ford carburetor on it. So it's got to be a Ferguson carburetor. Anyway, we'll find one sooner or later, I know it. But for now, it's all good. I'm going to do what I always do when it's here. I'm going to pump everything that I can grease full of grease, and then we'll put the hood back on it, and I guess she can go back home. Oh, that's it. Greased up, put the hood back on, made sure the lights still work. She's ready to go home. Well, that was quite an adventure. Man, we got into all kinds of stuff with it this time. I still hate that stupid carburetor, but we will persevere. Sooner or later, we're going to get this carburetor situation sorted out. That's the only thing on this that still kind of aggravates me a little bit. But anyway, as usual, we've fiddled about with it and got it running okay again. Maybe this time it'll stay running okay. Who knows? Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up for this one. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Hope you'll come back and see us again next time. And until then, this is Kevin saying so long from the Claremont Classic Garage.